The wind howled like a wounded animal, clawing at the walls of the tiny cabin. Ada Hensley pulled her threadbare shawl tighter, listening to the storm rage outside. She had nothing left but her faith, her 2 sleeping children, and the stubborn hope that tomorrow might be kinder. Then, a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not the creaking wood. A desperate pounding at the door. A man's voice, raw with pain, begging for help. And in that moment, Ada faced a choice. Turn away a stranger or risk everything to save him. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the cold crept in through the cracks in the cabin walls. Ada knelt beside the hearth, adding the last few sticks of firewood. It wouldn't last the night, but it would have to be enough. She glanced at her children, Ben, 10 years old with his father's serious eyes, and little Annie, 6 and still clutching her rag doll even in sleep. They had gone to bed hungry again. The last of the flour was gone, the potatoes nearly so. Winter had been cruel, and spring was slow in coming. Ada whispered a prayer, the same one she said every night. Lord, provide for us. Give us strength. Then a noise. At first, she thought it was the wind shaking the door, but it came again, harder, a fist pounding, weak but frantic. Then a groan, a man's voice, rough and broken. Help, please. Her heart hammered. Opening the door to a stranger at night was dangerous, but leaving a man to die in the snow, that was something she couldn't do. She grabbed the iron poker from the hearth, just in case, and unlatched the door. The wind nearly tore it from her hands. Snow swirled in, stinging her face. And there, half buried in the drifts, was a man. He was tall, or would have been if he weren't crumpled in the snow. His clothes were fine, too fine for a drifter, but torn and stained with blood. His face was pale, his lips blue with cold. One hand clutched his side, dark red seeping through his fingers. Ma. Ben's voice behind her was sleepy but sharp. Who is that? Ada didn't know, but it didn't matter. Help me get him inside, she said. Together, they dragged the stranger in. He was heavy, his body limp with cold and pain. Annie woke and let out a little gasp, but Ada hushed her gently. Fetch the blankets, sweetheart, and the rag bundle from the cupboard. The man groaned as they laid him by the fire. His skin was ice to the touch. Ada peeled back his coat, her stomach turning at the sight of the wound, a bullet hole, angry and deep. He's gonna die, Ben whispered. Not if we can help it, Ada said firmly. She had nursed her husband through fever, had stitched up cuts and set broken bones. But this was worse. Still she would try. She cleaned the wound as best she could, pressing a clean rag to stop the bleeding. The man's eyes fluttered open once, hazel, clouded with pain, before closing again. Who is he, Ma? Annie asked, wide-eyed. I don't know, Ada admitted. But one thing was certain. This man was running from something, or someone, and now so were they. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, by the flickering firelight, a wounded stranger fought for his life, and a widow and her children fought just as hard to save him. The fire crackled weakly as Ada pressed another clean cloth against the stranger's wound. His breathing was shallow, his face slick with sweat despite the cold still clinging to his skin. Ben hovered nearby, his young face tight with worry. Annie clutched her doll, her big eyes fixed on the unconscious man. Will he live, Ma? Annie whispered. Ada didn't know. The bullet had gone deep, and she had no medicine strong enough to fight infection. All she had was hot water, clean rags, and prayer. We'll do what we can, she said softly. The man stirred, his fingers twitching. A low groan escaped his lips. His eyelids fluttered, then opened just enough to reveal hazy, pain-filled eyes. He looked at Ada, confusion swimming in his gaze. Where? His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. You're safe, Ada said. You were hurt. We found you outside. He tried to sit up, but a sharp gasp of pain stopped him. His hand flew to his side, his face twisting. Don't move, Ada said firmly. You'll tear the wound open again. The man's eyes darted around the small cabin, taking in the humble surroundings, the worn furniture, the patched quilts, the 2 children watching him with wary curiosity. His gaze lingered on Ben, who stood stiffly, like he was ready to defend his mother if needed. "You saved me," the man murmured. Ada nodded. "What's your name?" A pause. Then Luke. No last name. No explanation. Ada didn't press. A man with a bullet in him had reasons for keeping secrets. Ben frowned. "Who shot you, mister?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Men who don't like loose ends." Annie inched closer, her fear fading into curiosity. "Does it hurt bad?" A faint, pained smile touched Luke's lips. "Not as bad as it did before you patched me up." Ada could see the effort it took for him to stay awake. "Rest now," she said. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." Luke's eyelids grew heavy, but before he drifted off, he muttered, "Thank you." As his breathing evened out, Ada let out a slow breath of her own. She didn't know who this man was, but one thing was clear. He was in trouble. And now so were they. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows, pale and weak. Ada had barely slept, checking on Luke through the night. His fever had risen, and more than once, he had muttered things in his sleep. Words like traitor, and land, and Jeb. Ben stood by the door, his arms crossed. "We should tell the sheriff," he said. Ada shook her head. "Not until we know who he is." "He's trouble," Ben insisted. "You heard him. Someone wants him dead. And if we turn him over, we might be sending him to his death," Ada said quietly. Annie, sitting near Luke's makeshift bed, piped up, "I think he's nice." Ben scowled. "You think everyone's nice." Ada ran a hand over her tired face. She needed supplies, food, medicine, news from town. But leaving the children alone with Luke felt risky, even if he was too weak to move. "Ben, I need you to stay here," she said. "Watch over Annie and our guest. I'll go into town and be back quick as I can." Ben didn't like it, but he nodded. The ride to town was cold and quiet. Ada kept her head down, her mind racing. Who was Luke? Why had he been shot? And what would happen if the men who hurt him came looking? At the general store, she traded the last of her eggs for flour and a small jar of honey. As she turned to leave, she overheard two men talking near the door. "Callahan's missing," one said. "Jeb's got men searching every road." "You think he's dead?" the other asked. "Better be. Ain't no way Jeb lets him walk away after what happened." Ada's blood ran cold. Callahan, a name that meant something in these parts. The Callahans owned the biggest ranch in the county. They were powerful, dangerous, and if Luke was a Callahan, she hurried home, her heart pounding. When she stepped inside the cabin, Luke was awake, propped up slightly, his eyes locked onto hers, sharp and alert despite his injury. "You heard something," he said. It wasn't a question. Ada set the supplies down slowly. "They're looking for you." Luke's expression darkened. "Jeb Carter." Ben stiffened. "You're Luke Callahan?" A heavy silence filled the room. Luke exhaled. "Yeah." Ada's hands trembled. She had brought a storm into her home, and now there was no turning back. The name Callahan hung in the air like gun smoke after a shot. Ada's hand stilled on the flour sack she'd just brought home. Ben's eyes widened, and even little Annie sensed the sudden tension, clutching her doll tighter. Luke Callahan, one of the richest ranchers in Wyoming, and now he lay wounded in her humble cabin. Ada forced herself to breathe. "You're that Callahan?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Yes." Ben took a step back, his face hardening. "Pa died working for your kind. Ranchers who care more about cattle than people." Luke flinched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he looked around the cabin, at the patched curtains, the empty pantry shelves, the way Annie's dress had been let down at the hem to fit her growing frame. His voice came out quiet. "Your husband worked for a ranch." Ada nodded stiffly. "For Big Tom Wexler. A steer trampled him when the herd spooked." She didn't add that Big Tom had sent a half-hearted letter of condolence, and nothing more. No money, no help, just empty words. Luke's hands clenched the blanket beneath him. "I'm sorry." An awkward silence settled. Then Annie, ever the peacemaker, piped up. "Mr. Luke, are you hungry?" The tension broke, just a little. A faint smile touched Luke's lips. I could eat, sweetheart. As Ada stirred up a thin cornmeal porridge, stretching their meager supplies even thinner, she studied Luke. He watched her children with an expression she couldn't quite name. When Ben grudgingly brought him water, Luke thanked him solemnly. When Annie chattered about her doll, Luke listened like her words mattered. Later, when the children were outside fetching firewood, Luke spoke quietly. You've got good kids. Ada wiped her hands on her apron. They're all I have left. Luke's gaze dropped to his injured side. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Then tell me the truth, Ada said. Who shot you? Luke hesitated, then sighed. My foreman, Jeb Carter. His voice turned bitter. I trusted him for years. Then I found out he's been stealing cattle, selling them off my land. When I confronted him, he gestured to his wound. Ada's stomach nodded. This wasn't just some drifter's trouble. This was a feud between powerful men, and now her family was caught in the middle. Outside, Ben's voice carried as he scolded Annie for dawdling. Luke's eyes followed the sound, something wistful in his expression. Your boy, he's got spirit. Ada smiled faintly. Too much sometimes. For the first time since he'd arrived, Luke's shoulders relaxed. That's not a bad thing. As the fire crackled and the winter wind moaned outside, Ada realized something strange. Despite everything, having Luke here didn't feel like a burden. It felt like having another pair of hands to help, another voice to break the silence. But in the back of her mind, a warning whispered, men like Luke Callahan don't stay in places like this. And when he leaves, what then? A week passed. Luke's strength returned slowly, though he still winced when he moved too fast. He insisted on helping where he could, chopping wood, though Ada had to stop him after just a few swings, mending a loose fence post, even showing Ben how to tie proper ranch knots. It was during one of these lessons that Annie came running from the edge of the property, her braids flying. Ma, Ryder's coming. Ada's blood turned to ice. She dropped the wash bucket with a splash. Luke was on his feet instantly, his hand going to his side where his gun usually hung, except he didn't have one. Ben, take Annie inside, Ada ordered. Now, 3 men rode up, their horses kicking up dust. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his chin, eyed Ada with a smirk. Afternoon, ma'am. Ada lifted her chin. Can I help you? The man's gaze slid past her to where Luke stood. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Luke stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Step down, Riley. This isn't your fight. Riley chuckled, but his eyes were cold. Jeb says different. Says you've got something that belongs to him. Ada's hands clenched into fists at her sides. There's nothing of yours here. The man ignored her, keeping his eyes on Luke. Jeb's offering a fair price for that scrap of land you're squatting on, ma'am. More than it's worth. Luke's voice turned dangerous. She's not selling. Riley's smile faded. Wasn't asking you, Callahan. He leaned forward in his saddle. Jeb says you're dead either way, but maybe the widow and her brats get to walk away, if she's smart. Behind her, Ada heard the cabin door creak open. Ben stood there, Pa's old rifle in his hands, trembling but determined. Riley laughed. Cute. He tipped his hat mockingly. We'll be back. Think hard, ma'am. As the riders disappeared in a cloud of dust, Luke turned to Ada, his face grim. They won't give up. Ada watched the horizon long after the men had vanished. The truth settled over her like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about Luke anymore. Her land sat on a precious water source, and men like Jeb Carter would kill to get it. That night, as she tucked Annie into bed, her daughter whispered, Are the bad men coming back? Ada smoothed her hair. Don't you worry, sweetheart. But when she stepped outside, where Luke stood watch under the stars, she didn't have to voice her fears. We'll fight, Luke said quietly. Together. Ada nodded, her resolve hardening. She might be just a poor widow in their eyes, but this land was her children's future, and she defended it with everything she had. The morning after the riders came, Ada found Luke sitting on the porch steps, sharpening a hunting knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His face was shadowed with stubble, his eyes tired but alert. He looked up as she approached. "You should have woken me for watch," Ada said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the dawn chill. Luke tested the knife's edge with his thumb. "You needed rest." Ada sat beside him, watching the pink streaks of sunrise spread across the sky. It would have been a beautiful morning if not for the danger hanging over them. "I've been thinking," she said slowly. "Maybe you should go." Luke's hand stilled. He didn't look at her. "It's not that I'm ungrateful for your help," Ada continued. "But you heard that man. They'll keep coming as long as you're here. If you leave." "If I leave, they'll take your land anyway," Luke said flatly. "Jeb doesn't make empty threats." Inside the cabin, they could hear Ben and Annie stirring. The smell of wood smoke and the sound of Annie's cheerful humming drifted through the open door. Luke turned to face Ada fully. "I won't let my trouble destroy your family. If you want me to go, I'll ride out today." His voice was steady, but something in his eyes looked lost. Ada studied his face, the stubborn set of his jaw, the quiet strength in his gaze. This wasn't the proud rancher she'd heard stories about. This was a man who'd been betrayed, who'd known pain, who'd eaten at her table and treated her children with kindness. A shout from the yard made them both turn. Ben was running toward them, his face flushed. "Ma, come quick. The south pasture." They followed Ben at a run. Near the property line, a crude sign had been planted in the earth. It read, "Sell or burn." Annie, who trailed after them, pressed against Ada's side. "What does it mean, Ma?" Ada didn't answer. Her throat had gone tight. Luke's hand came down gently on Ben's shoulder. "Son, take your sister back to the house." The streets were unusually quiet. A few townsfolk glanced their way, then quickly looked elsewhere. Ada's skin prickled with unease. They had just dismounted outside the telegraph office when a familiar voice drawled, "Well, look who finally showed his face." Jeb Carter leaned against a post, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. 3 of his men flanked him. Luke stepped slightly in front of Ada. "This is between us, Jeb. The widow and her children aren't part of it." Jeb smirked. "They are now." His gaze slid to Ada. "Last chance to sell, Mrs. Hensley. Final offer." Ada lifted her chin. "My land isn't for sale." Jeb's smile vanished. He took a step forward, only to freeze when Luke's hand hovered near his gun. A tense silence fell. Somewhere down the street, a shop door creaked shut. A dog barked. Then Jeb laughed, the sound harsh. "You always did have a soft spot for strays, Callahan." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Be seeing you." As Jeb and his men sauntered away, Ada let out a shaky breath. Luke's jaw was tight. He won't wait long. Inside the telegraph office, Luke scribbled a message while Ada watched the street through the window. When he finished, the clerk paled at the name on the paper but sent it without question. "Help's coming," Luke said as they remounted. 2 days at most." They rode home in silence, both lost in thought. The wind carried the scent of rain, and dark clouds gathered on the horizon. It wasn't until they crested the hill overlooking Ada's homestead that they saw the smoke. "No," Ada whispered, then kicked her mare into a gallop. The barn was fully engulfed, flames licking at the evening sky. Ben stood in the yard, clutching Annie, both faces streaked with soot. "They came right after you left," Ben choked out, threw torches and rode off laughing. Ada pulled her children close, her eyes stinging for more than smoke. Behind her, Luke stared at the burning barn, his hands clenched into fists. When he spoke, his voice was steel. "They want a war. They'll get one." That night, as the embers of the barn glowed in the dark, Ada sat on the porch steps with Luke. Inside, the children slept fitfully. "Tomorrow," Ada said quietly, "we prepare." Luke nodded, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "Tomorrow we fight back." And for the first time since her husband died, Ada didn't feel alone. She had an ally, a partner. Maybe, just maybe, something more. But first they had to survive. The morning dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with the scent of charred wood from the ruined barn. Ada rose before the sun, her body aching from lack of sleep. She found Luke already outside, standing at the edge of the property with a pair of field glasses, scanning the horizon. "They'll come today," he said without turning around. "Jeb won't wait after what he did to the barn." Ada nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "I know." Inside, she woke Ben and Annie with gentle touches and soft words. Ben dressed quickly, his face set in a determined frown that made him look far older than his 10 years. Annie, sensing the tension, stayed close to Ada's side as they prepared a simple breakfast of biscuits and gravy. Luke came in just as they were finishing. "We need to get ready," he said, his voice calm but firm. Together, they worked through the morning, boarding up windows, moving supplies to the root cellar, and preparing for the worst. Luke showed Ben how to load and handle the old rifle safely, though Ada's heart clenched at the sight of her son holding a gun. "Just in case," Luke assured her quietly when he saw her expression. "Better he knows how to protect himself and Annie if—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Ada understood. As noon approached, the first dust cloud appeared on the road. Ada's hand shook as she counted the riders, 6 in all, with Jeb Carter at the front. Luke checked his pistol one last time. "Remember the plan. You and the children stay in the cellar no matter what you hear." Ada grabbed his arm. "You can't face them alone." A ghost of a smile touched Luke's lips. "I won't be alone for long." Then the riders were there, reining in just beyond the fence line. Jeb tipped his hat mockingly. "Morning, folks. Come to talk business." Luke stepped forward, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "Only business you've got here is leaving." Jeb's smile faded. "You always were a fool, Callahan. Now you're gonna die protecting some widow's dirt farm." He drew his gun. A shot rang out, but not from Jeb's pistol. One of Jeb's men cried out as his hat went flying. From the ridge behind the house, a dozen riders appeared. Luke's men from the Callahan ranch, led by his foreman, a grizzled old cowboy named Hanks. Jeb's face twisted in rage. "You set a trap." Luke's voice was steel. "You're trespassing, Jeb. Sheriff's on his way." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Jeb made his choice. He raised his gun toward Luke. Ada didn't think. She grabbed the rifle and fired into the air. The sudden shot made everyone freeze. "This is my land," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "And you're not welcome here." Jeb's eyes darted between Luke, Ada, and the approaching ranch hands. With a snarl, he holstered his weapon. "This ain't over." As Jeb and his men rode away, Ada's knees nearly gave out. Luke was at her side in an instant, his arm steadying her. Behind them, Ben whooped with excitement while Annie clapped her hands. The sound of cheering ranch hands filled the air as Hanks and the others rode up. But Ada only had eyes for Luke. "You planned this," she whispered. Luke nodded. "Had Hanks watching the place since yesterday. Knew Jeb would come." His hand found hers. "You were brave." Ada looked at her children, at the scorched remains of her barn, at the men who'd come to their aid. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The next days passed in a blur. Luke's men helped rebuild the barn, while others kept watch for Jeb's return. The sheriff, once he arrived, took statements and promised to deal with Jeb, though everyone knew the man would likely slip away rather than face justice. On the third evening, with the new barn walls standing tall and the children asleep, Ada found Luke sitting by the fire pit behind the house, staring into the flames. She sat beside him, the warmth of the fire chasing away the evening chill. "You're quiet tonight." Luke poked at the embers with a stick. "Been thinking. About everything." He sighed. "Ada, I need to say something." Her heart skipped a beat. "I never meant to bring this trouble to your door," he began, "but meeting you and those kids." His voice grew rough. "It's changed me." Ada studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hat shaded his eyes. "How so?" Luke turned to face her fully. "I used to think the ranch was everything. Land, cattle, money. Then I woke up in your home, saw how you love those children, how you work so hard just to keep food on the table." He shook his head. "You've got more real wealth in this little patch of dirt than I've had in all my acres." Ada's throat tightened. Luke Callahan, are you saying you envy a poor widow? His laugh was soft. I'm saying I admire you. More than admire. He reached for her hand. I've come to care for you, Ada. And for Ben and Annie too. The fire crackled between them as Ada processed his words. Part of her wanted to pull away. Love had only brought her pain before. But another part, a part she'd thought long buried, stirred to life. Luke, she took a shaky breath. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. He squeezed her hand. Neither do I. But I'd like to find out together, if you'll have me. In that moment, with the firelight dancing in his eyes and his calloused hand warm around hers, Ada let herself hope. Maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't ending, but beginning. From the house, Annie's sleepy voice called out, Ma, I had a bad dream. Ada smiled and stood, pulling Luke up with her. Come on, she said softly. Let's go see to our girl. The word "our" hung between them, sweet and promising, as they walked toward the house together. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with golden sunlight spilling across the Hensley. No, the Callahan homestead. Ada stood in front of a small mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the simple blue dress she'd sewn for the occasion. It wasn't fancy, but the color brought out her eyes, and the stitching was her finest work yet. A soft knock came at the door. Ma. Ben's voice was uncharacteristically nervous. You ready? Ada took a deep breath and opened the door. Ben stood there, scrubbed clean and wearing his Sunday best, his hair slicked down in a way that made him look so much like his father that her heart ached for just a moment. Behind him, Annie twirled in her dress, her curls bouncing. You look beautiful, Ma, Annie declared, beaming. Ada smoothed her skirt, suddenly self-conscious. You think Mr. Luke will like it? Ben rolled his eyes, but there was a smile tugging at his lips. He like you in a potato sack, Ma. Laughing, Ada took her children's hands. Well then, let's not keep him waiting. Outside, the entire homestead had been transformed. Luke's ranch hands had built an arbor of fresh-cut pine boughs, and wildflowers, picked by Annie, decorated the makeshift aisle. The small gathering included their closest neighbors, the sheriff, and even Hanks, Luke's foreman, who stood stiffly in a suit that looked like it hadn't been worn in years. And there, at the end of that aisle, stood Luke. He was clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing a crisp white shirt and a BOLO tie Ada had never seen before. But what struck her most was the look in his eyes, like he couldn't believe his luck. As Ada walked toward him, Ben proudly escorting her on one side and Annie scattering flower petals on the other, she realized she couldn't believe hers either. The preacher began the simple ceremony, but Ada barely heard the words. All she could think about was how far they'd come, from a wounded stranger collapsing in the snow to this moment, where two broken families were becoming one. When it came time to say, I do, Luke's voice was steady and sure. Ada's only trembled a little. Then, as the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Luke leaned down and kissed her, softly, sweetly, in front of God and everyone. Annie giggled, Ben pretended to gag, and the small crowd cheered. Afterward, as they celebrated with a feast the neighbors had contributed to, Luke slipped his arm around Ada's waist. Happy, he murmured. Ada looked around, at Ben showing off his roping skills to the ranch hands, at Annie dancing barefoot in the grass, at the sturdy new barn, and the fields that would finally have enough hands to properly tend them. More than I ever thought possible, she admitted. Luke smiled and pressed a kiss to her temple. Good, because this is just the beginning. A year later, the Hensley Callahan ranch was thriving. The disputed water source now irrigated fields that produced enough not just for them, but to share with struggling neighbors. Ben, though still young, had taken to ranch life like a duck to water, learning everything Luke could teach him. Annie had started school in town, proudly telling anyone who'd listen about her Pa Luke. And Ada stood on the porch of their newly expanded home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. Luke came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Penny for your thoughts, he murmured. She leaned back against him with a contented sigh. just thinking how God works in mysterious ways. Who'd have thought a snowstorm and a gunshot wound would lead us here? Luke chuckled, his breath warm against her ear. I'd take that bullet again 100 times if it brought me to you. Ada turned in his arms and kissed him, grateful for the second chance neither of them had seen coming, but both had desperately needed. Did you enjoy Ada and Luke's story? If so, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of faith, love, and second chances. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. God bless.